Hello and welcome back to another Demis Hellen tutorial. This is part 2 of the Dune series. We're going to take a look at the oscillators and the voices and how they work together. If you haven't already seen part 1, that is an overview of Dune 3 and its main features, so I highly suggest that you watch that before continuing with this episode. So the texture that you can hear that is playing right now, there is a sub bass under there that's sequenced. That is not part of this design, but that top part with multiple layers is all coming from one preset. It's using multiple layers to build up a nice thick sounding texture that you can use in any sort of sound design. This particularly happens to be more cinematic, but it can still be used in trance, and it just shows you that there's no ends to the possibilities of using Dune 3. This is going to be the first part of the oscillators and unison voicing / voice edit functions here, because these directly tie with each other, and it's going to be a very long video if I just talk through this all in one big lump. And what we're going to look at is the oscillators here. So we do have 3 in total. I'm just going to talk you through how to use them, and we'll touch on the voice editing here, and then in the next video we'll look at some more advanced voice editing. And to get started, we have oscillators 1 and 2. These are identical in every way. They have the same features, same functions. So these are identical. And oscillator 3, on the other hand, is giving you the basic waveforms. It's giving you some semitone and fine tune controls as well as a reset button. We'll look at that in a second. We can load our own wave files in here, and we can use them as loops, or we can use them as one-shots. And finally, we have a noise generator in there, and we have white and pink noise depending on what you want. We have controls of low and high passing, as well as the width of our noise. These all tie down into the oscillator mixer here. So we have oscillators 1, 2 and 3. We have a ring modulation section, and we're going to cover that in another video as well, and noise. So the main features here in the oscillators are density, amount and tuning. So what's happening here is density set to 1. We have one voice. This is the oscillator itself, and it's set to a saw wave. We can choose multiple different directions for sound design, but that is just one voice. Now, if we increase the density, we start to get detuned voices. We actually get unison here. And then we have the amount control, and you can see as I reduce that, it will reduce all of the unison voices and reveal the original voice. So if we turn that to 0, we get the original like we just had the density set to 1. And that just gives us an option to mix the intensity of the unison voices. Now, where things get exciting is here in this drop-down menu, we have tuning. So not tuning in the conventional sense, as just like moving the fine pitch, for example. This is changing the distribution of these unison voices. So at the moment, linear means they're just all equally spaced. And if we detune these to 100%, you can see equal spacing, and we get a standard detune. Obviously at that level, that is not what we're going to be using in trance anyway. But you can see individual spacing. So I'm just going to increase the spread here for a second. Just make it a bit nicer on the ears. And tuning up here, we have non-linear, Gaussian, alternate random, perfect fifth, minor, major, sub and swarm. So non-linear. As you can see, if we increase the detune, we have a more of a concentration in the middle around the original voice. And if we increase the density, you can see the concentration of those unison voices are around that singular voice, and then sporadically just spread out evenly. So that gives you a more concentrated sound compared to linear. It gives you a more refined sound, and you could argue you can push the detune a little bit further, because obviously all of these unison voices are spread out in a different way. Then we have Gaussian, and what this does is roll off the unison voices, as you can see, and we're going to get a softer approach. I love using this for pads, so it's just a hint there that you can use that to start your sound design pretty quickly by getting a softer, overall wider sound. Compare that to linear again. It's less intense, and it just gives you a better starting point when you start mixing that in conjunction with the filters. You start to get a really nice, softer approach to your sound design. And then alternate, is exactly what it does. It's alternating between, let's just keep it really simple, wide and narrow, wide and narrow, wide and narrow. So it's giving you an alternate unison voicing spread. It gives you a nice thinner approach, but still giving you width and texture. It's just giving it a bit of a thinner sound. And I do not mind using alternate. Random is also one of my favourite ones, but we can push detune to the absolute max with random, and random does exactly what it says. So if I push detune all the way up, we have a usable sound there. So that's just randomly applying the voices. Then perfect fifth is adding a fifth to that one note, and we're pressing middle C here. Go down to a few less voices. We get that perfect fifth sound. We can hear it a little bit better there. And then we have the minor and major chords. And that's all from one note press based on your density here. And then sub-oscillator, let's just see this as having an octave lower and an octave higher mixed. So C3 is going to add some C2 notes in there onto those unison voices, compared to the original linear. And it's a nice option for certain sound design to create a little bit of lower end and move some of your frequencies around. And then finally we have swarm, and this is just modulating each voice independently, and it sounds really nice, especially at slower speeds if you want that really slow modulation, and it sounds really hard and hard hitting if you have the rate up high. So let's listen to this on low. And what we can hear there is each voice is being modulated individually, so the pitch is bending independent on every single voice, all 10. And if we increase the rate, so you can hear now that the rate is so fast, that's just like increasing the speed rate of your LFO. So it's a modern sound and it adds a lot of bite and texture to the sound. Resetting this to linear, we can talk about these controls here now. So semi and fine, this gives you the ability to move up each note. So if that was middle C that you're playing, if you put it up one, that's actually a C sharp now, and so on. Very familiar controls. Fine tune is going to bend that sound finely. Detune and spread control how wide the voices are and then how wide in the stereo field they are spread. And then the reset button. Now let's have a chat about this. When we hit the key, it's using the phase as you would expect. It's picking a random point every time to keep everything fluid and just moving in a sort of fashion that sounds natural and nice to the ear. And by hitting reset, it's going to pick the exact same phase point every time, and it's going to result in this sort of sound. And it gives you that hard transient at the beginning. Can be great for basses because you want the bass to use the same point and sound the same every time that bass note hits. You don't want it to feel like it's moving around because you'll lose power in your track, you'll lose the groove and the drive. Now, moving on to the bottom panel here of the oscillator, we have our waveform chooser, so we can choose the basic shapes here in the virtual analog. And we have a frequency control here, which does nothing when you move it here. But we can use the sync function here. But once we click the sync function, so we can manipulate the waveform just using the sync capabilities. We won't go too much into that, but that option is there. Now the most important part here for me is the synthesis type. So let's return the density to 1. Now we can change this from virtual analog to wavetable, and that is the next in the list. And when we click here, we have a choice of 3 tables, very similar to the virtual analog, but with a difference. You can load your own wavetables, you can create your own wavetables, and it is really just a way of cycling through multiple waveforms, and it gives you a lot more interesting sound design when you do it this way. Position is going to change and cycle through these wavetables, and there's just 3 in this one, and it'll cycle through. So if we hold a key, It'll cycle through those three waveforms and you'll hear it will blend them together. Interpol, if we turn this off, you can see as soon as it goes over to 50%, it'll change to the next sound, which is that. And then if you go to 100, it's going to change to that square. Interpol is great for blending sounds. If you're wanting to just choose indefinitely that without having to choose the position at 50, you can just turn that off and choose till it hits that sound, and it won't have any blending options between the other sounds. And then we have a one-shot button there as well. Okay, let's demonstrate a more intricate wavetable. So let's choose sort of random here. So we can see here we've got a wavetable. If we click here, we have got 16 tables that we can choose from. And we can cycle through these. And that will go through to a saw wave, so you can see saw to random. And what we can do here is choose that sound. We can modulate this as well if we wanted to make a bass, for example. We could modulate the position and get some really interesting sound design. And then to add to the powerhouse, that is wavetables, we can click edit. We can just hand draw things in like this and create new sounds on the fly, so you can hear exactly what you are doing. You can choose your layers down here, and we have a few options. So looking at the bottom first, these are our layers, so we can add and remove layers, and we can see we have 17, we can put 18, 19, and we can draw our own in there and continue that wavetable on. We have copy and paste functions. You can insert maths formulas to create sounds. So if you're into that and you're a mathematician, which I am not, you can put your formulas in there. There's some interesting sound design to be had. And then here we can choose some of the standard stuff. Ramp up, nice presets, just to get you started. Then we have our selection tool. So we've got our pen tool. We've got a line tool, so we can get a bit more intricate with our design there. We have like a node feature. And these nodes then can be moved, so you can get really precise if you want to, with keeping a very linear line, and then you can curve and bend these, very similar to sort of the MSEGs and envelopes. Finally, we have our harmonics feature, so we can just add the harmonics in and draw them in if we want to, like this. And finally, before we jump out of this window, we can import our own, export our own wavetables, and we have options to normalize, reverse, etc. here. And then finally, we can look at frequency modulation, FM synthesis. This is typically known with the classic 80s bell sound, the synth piano sound, but FM is more than just those sounds, and we can create some really interesting designs. We can get some really hard hitting basses, or we can get really soft flowy sounds for pads and textures. So we can see we have a parallel and a serial option here, with B feeding back into itself as a feedback loop, or A feeding back into itself as a feedback loop. And we have feedback controls here. So these are all the same. We've got amount, ratio, and fine, and you can see that's the same for A, B, and C, and then we have key tracking and feedback controls here. And what's happening here is it uses 3 sine waves to create and generate sound, and that is A, B, and C. They're typically known, as it says in the manual, as operators, so you might know it as that if you're familiar with FM, but these are very powerful tools. And just to quickly demonstrate what we can do here, we can change the fine tune of A and B. We can put one max and one max the opposite way, and we'll hear a very bassy sound that has quite a nice growl to it. So let's just hear how it sounds just on C2 here. And I'm going to turn the fine tune down on here. So you can hear exactly what's happening with me turning that fine slowly. And then I'm going to turn the fine of B up. You can see we're starting to develop a bass sound already, and then we have the controls here to manipulate that. So we have a ratio control. So let's just try on the first one here. So let's have it on number 2. And then we can have this on number 1, keep it there. And then we can control the amount of what is audible. And you can hear how they're interacting with each other as these are changing on the amounts. Now, the important features here are the algorithm and how it is working with these, and that is This is in parallel at the moment, and B is going to provide feedback, so we can add even more chaos into the sound to the point that it's just going to collapse. And that is all depending on what sound you're creating. Now, if we jump into here and use them in sequence, so these are in series where A feeds back into itself, we're going to get a very different approach to the sound. You can see straight away we haven't changed anything apart from the algorithm, but now A is first, B is second, C is third. And what is happening here is we're getting feedback from A. So if we was to turn A amount down, we get no feedback when we move this back and forth. And that's the same for the other algorithm here. If we just turn that back up, if we turn B off, we get no feedback. So you can see how that is working with that. And then we have key tracking, obviously, for wherever you are on the keyboard, it's going to react differently. And that is very similar to how the filters work when you use key tracking on there. And without going into too much depth on those, let's just have a quick sound design in this portion of the tutorial, and then we will talk about the voices and how we can layer sounds up and get even more out of Dune 3 for your preset designs. So we're just going to create a little design here using some Wavetable and FM. I think we're going to create a pad or something like that. We're not going to use the unison voices in the edit section over here. We'll leave that for next video and we'll improve on this preset. So I'm going to start with a Wavetable and I'm going to pick, let's look at Legacy, for example. So I'm going to pick something quite soft. I'm going to create a pad. So that's quite audible, it's not too low, but it sounds nice. And we're going to set our filter up here for both these layers. So it's sort of a key sound it's starting to sound like there, that's quite nice. But we're going to increase the density here. I'm going to put, say, 9 unison voices. I'm just going to turn up the spread to give it a nice wide feel. Let's just turn the detune. And I'm going to choose Gaussian for this one. And you can hear it's not playing my entire chord because we've got a limited voice. So we'll talk about this in the next video. I'm just going to increase my voices to 10 just to cover it. Okay, so all starting to sound quite nice. And I'm just going to increase the detune again to get a wider sound. Perfect. I'm going to add a little bit of LFO on here, so I'm just going to pick this. We're going to look at these as well, so don't worry about that. Choose poly. I'm just going to bring the amount to about 60%. So we've now got a randomized movement from our LFO 1. I'm just going to assign LFO 1 to the oscillator 1 fine and just increase that. Let's just pick 9. So it just gives it a bit of movement on the pitch. Just increase the amount. So it's just adding a little touch of humanization in there. Now we're going to choose oscillator number 2 and we're going to choose FM on here. Let's bring up oscillator 2. I'm just going to turn oscillator 1 off for a second. And I'm going to add 1 voice for now. Okay, so we're starting okay. It's a little bit too raspy and bright. So let's change that with our amounts and ratios here. Okay, so we've gone for the classic bell sound there. Even though we've got a slow attack, it suddenly becomes more of a texture or a drone if you wanted to use it in the lower portions. It's got really nice range on it. So we're going to mix in oscillator 2 into 1. We're going to have oscillator 1 be more dominant. Let's play a chord. Sounding beautiful. And then we can just put some filters on here. So I'm just going to pick the Polaris for now. And we're going to put some light distortion on there. Just have, say, 15%. And there we are. We have a lovely sounding pad. We can drench that in some reverb. I'm going to pick Stadium. Just going to chop the lows out, let's say about 45-ish%. I'll increase the time to something crazy like 8 seconds. Increase the dry wet so it smooths it out. Add a bit of colour. Let's just turn the mod down as well. Beautiful. And there we have it. That is the end of this part. If you have any questions related to this tutorial video, please let me know down in the comments. You know I answer all the questions that are related. And if you haven't already, hit like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you get to see when these uploads go live. The Dune series is every 2 weeks. And if you still haven't seen the first video and you've watched this one, you can go and check out the playlist that is Dune 3. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.